Okay, let's dive right in. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a really specific piece of source material, incredibly visual.
Yeah.
It lays out this, well, dramatic future event in just striking detail. We're looking specifically at the text from Ezekiel, chapter 39.
hmm
And, when you read it, you're just immediately hit by the focus, the intensity on this single massive event and everything that happens afterwards.
It really does narrow the focus, doesn't it? And what jumps out right away is this prophecy about a figure named Gog. It's all about a huge act of divine judgment involving this coalition of nations.
Right.
And the text, it explicitly links this whole thing to really profound consequences, implications for both Israel and, well, the nations around them.
So our mission, let's say, for this session is to really walk through this text piece by piece, understand the sequence it lays out.
Yeah.
But maybe more than just the what. We want to dig into what the text itself seems to be highlighting as the main point, the why behind it all. What are the key takeaways here?
Exactly. We'll just follow the narrative the text gives us, pull out the key descriptions, and like you said, crucially, the reasons the text explicitly provides for why all this is happening.
Okay, let's start at the beginning then. The text opens with this really direct address against Gog. Who exactly is Gog, according to this source?
Well, the text identifies him pretty clearly as the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal,
Okay.
and the declaration against him, it's incredibly direct right from the
Yeah.
start. This is what the sovereign Lord says: I am against you, O Gog.
Wow.
Zero ambiguity about the divine opposition there.
I am against you. That really sets a tone, doesn't it? And it doesn't just say God is against him. It describes God um, actively bringing Gog and his forces to a specific place for this confrontation. What actions does the text actually attribute to God here?
It's quite specific. The text says God will, quote, turn you around, drag you along.
Drag him along.
Yeah, and that he will bring you from the far north and very precisely send Gog and this huge army against the mountains of Israel. The whole movement, this convergence, it's presented in the text as completely orchestrated, directed by God.
Huh.
What's not like Gog just decides to attack. The text frames it as a divine appointment, really, for judgment.
That detail, dragged along, brought from the far north, specifically against the mountains of Israel, it just hammers home that divine control you mentioned.
Yeah.
Okay, so God directs this massive force led by Gog to this specific battleground, the mountains of Israel. What does the text say happens once they get there?
The outcome described is, well, absolute, final. Right there on those mountains, Gog, all his troops, every nation with him, they will fall. It's presented as just a complete decisive defeat.
And the text even gives these almost like cinematic little details about how the soldiers become helpless.
It does, yeah. It paints this picture of God striking the bow from their left hand, making the arrows just drop from their right hand. It's a really specific image of being totally disarmed, unable to fight back. And the result is just devastation across the landscape, the bodies, given as food to all kinds of carrion birds and to the wild animals.
That's incredibly visceral imagery. And the text hammers home the certainty, right? You will fall in the open field, and then adds very pointedly, for I have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord.
Exactly.
So it's not just, oh, they lost a battle. It's framed as divinely decreed judgment, executed precisely as intended.
And what's really fascinating, I think, is that right after describing this overwhelming destruction, the text immediately pivots. It explains the reason. The why is put front and center.
Yes. It doesn't leave you guessing about the purpose. It's spelled out.
Yeah.
So what are those core reasons given in the text for this huge event?
The main motivation that's highlighted is divine self-revelation and clearing God's name, essentially. God says, I will send fire on Magog and on those who live in safety in the coastlands, and they will know that I am the Lord. It's like a global display meant to show God's power and identity, especially to those nations who thought they were untouchable, safe.
And it's also deeply tied into God's relationship with Israel, too.
Oh, absolutely crucial. God declares, I will make known my holy name among my people Israel. I will no longer let my holy name be profaned. So this event, it's directly linked to God's reputation, his relationship with his own people, kind of clearing away any association with their past failures. And the text reinforces this, adding, the nations will know that I, the Lord, am the Holy One in Israel. This event proves his unique standing with Israel to the whole world.
So the absolute core purpose presented here is this powerful, undeniable act of God revealing himself, showing who he is, both to Israel and the wider world, and basically vindicating his holy name. And the text sounds incredibly sure this is going to happen.
Oh, there's zero ambiguity presented about the certainty. None. The text uses really emphatic language. It is coming. It will surely take place, declares the sovereign Lord. This is the day I have spoken of. It's framed not as, maybe, but as a guaranteed future event.
Okay, so after the battle description and the divine purpose, the text takes this really remarkable turn. It shifts focus quite dramatically to the super practical, almost mundane details of the aftermath. What happens on the ground in Israel? This is where the level of detail just skyrockets.
It really does. It's quite something. One of the most striking practical consequences described is what the people living in the towns of Israel will actually do. They're told to go out and use the weapons for fuel and burn them up.
Wait, the defeated army's weapons become firewood. What kind of equipment does it list?
It lists the small and large shields, the bows and arrows, the war clubs and spears, pretty much the standard kit, offensive and defensive gear just left behind after this total defeat.
And the length of time they use these weapons for fuel is that's pretty staggering.
It is. The text specifies for 7 years they will use them for fuel.
7 years?
Yeah.
Just think about that. What does that length of time and the fact that they won't need regular firewood suggest about the sheer size of this defeated army?
It strongly implies an absolutely colossal force, doesn't it? The amount of military gear left behind is so vast, it becomes the main fuel source for everyone locally for, well, the better part of a decade.
Yeah.
And the text makes this point explicit. They will not need to gather wood from the fields or cut it from the forests because they will use the weapons for fuel. It's presenting this picture of complete provision coming directly from the leftovers of this destroyed invasion.
And there's even that little detail about like a reversal of fortunes, like and a payback.
Exactly. The text adds that they will plunder those who plundered them and loot those who looted them. So the very ones who came to take from Israel end up providing the resources for Israel's sustenance.
So 7 years of fuel from weapons. Okay. But what about the bodies? I mean, this immense army. The text also goes into incredibly specific, almost procedural detail about the burial.
Yeah, this section is maybe where the meticulous detail is most pronounced. The text says God will give Gog and his forces a burial place, specifically in Israel, in the valley of those who travel east toward the sea.
Okay.
And this place gets a name, the Valley of Gog, which means basically the Valley of the Multitude of Gog.
And the sheer number of bodies is so huge, it actually affects the landscape, at least for a while.
Yes, the text notes that. It says the number of bodies will be so great that it will block the way of travelers because Gog and all his hordes will be buried there.
Oh.
The physical impact on just, getting around is mentioned.
And how long does the text say this massive burial effort takes?
It specifies for 7 months the house of Israel will be burying them in order to cleanse the land.
7 months. Dedicated just to burial, for the purpose of cleansing the land. Who's involved in this huge job?
The text says, all the people of the land will bury them. It's presented as a full-on nationwide undertaking.
Wow.
And the text links the significance of this day and all the effort afterwards back to that divine purpose we talked about. It says, the day I am glorified will be a memorable day for them.
But it sounds like the cleansing isn't just done after those main 7 months. There's like an ongoing process described, too.
That's a key detail, yeah. It really emphasizes the scale. Men will be regularly employed to cleanse the land, so after the initial 7 months, they will begin their search. And the text gets incredibly specific about this continued cleanup. It says, as they go through the land and one of them sees a human bone, he will set up a marker beside it until the grave bones have buried it in the Valley of Gog.
A bone marker.
Seriously.
Setting up little flags for individual bones scattered across the land. What does that level of detail about the cleanup tell you about how the text wants us to see the reality and the scale of this event?
Well, it seems designed to convey that this isn't just some fleeting symbolic thing. The text is describing something with immense, tangible, frankly messy physical consequences that require sustained, organized effort on a national level just to deal with. The detail about the bone marker, the specific valley name, the duration, 7 years, 7 months, it all grounds this prophecy in a very concrete, albeit future reality, according to the text itself.
It really forces you to picture the scene, the sheer scope of it. And didn't the text even mention a town related to this site?
Yes, it adds, almost as an aside, also a town called Hamona will be there. All these little details just pile up to underscore the thoroughness of the cleanup needed to, quote, cleanse the land.
So, okay, 7 years of fuel from weapons,
Yeah.
7 months of burying bodies, plus this ongoing meticulous search and mark process for bones. It's a picture of an event so massive its physical impact takes years and months of focused national effort to handle.
It certainly paints a picture of devastation on an almost unimaginable scale, and it requires this total societal response just to deal with the aftermath.
Now, before getting into all that cleanup detail, the text also includes this very striking and, frankly, intense description of something called a great sacrifice for birds and animals. Can you break that section down for us?
Yeah, this section is pretty vivid. The text describes God commanding the Son of Man, that's the prophetic figure, to call out to every kind of bird and all the wild animals.
Okay.
And the purpose of this call: to invite them to a great sacrifice that God is preparing for them, specifically on the mountains of Israel.
And what's being sacrificed here? What are these creatures invited to eat?
They're explicitly invited to eat flesh and drink blood.
Wow.
And the source of this, well, gruesome feast is identified as the flesh of mighty men and drink the blood of the princes of the earth.
The text uses some really powerful, maybe unsettling comparisons there, too.
It does. It compares the source, the bodies, to rams and lambs, goats and bulls, all of them fattened animals from Bashan, like prime livestock. And the description of the consumption is equally graphic. It says they will eat fat till you are glutted and drink blood till you are drunk.
And the menu is pretty comprehensive, listing different kinds of fighters.
Indeed. They will eat your fill of horses and riders, mighty men and soldiers of every kind, declares the sovereign Lord. It's a really powerful image, isn't it? Showing the totality of the destruction and defeat, framed almost like a ritual feast provided by God himself from the slain enemy forces. It just reinforces the idea that the defeat is absolute total. Even the remains are consumed.
Wow. That imagery is definitely potent. It really underscores the completeness of the divine judgment being described on these forces. And it highlights that divine orchestrating hand behind every single stage, even what happens to the bodies.
And then, pulling back from those specific, really graphic details, the text connects this entire dramatic future event back to Israel's past history and their future destiny. It provides this larger narrative context for why something on this scale is, well, necessary according to this text.
How does the text frame Israel's past leading up to this point?
The text is pretty direct about it. It states flat out that the people of Israel went into exile for their sin because they were unfaithful to me. Their suffering, their exile, is presented as a direct consequence of their unfaithfulness to God.
And what was the result of that sin, that unfaithfulness, according to the text?
God states, "So I hid my face from them and handed them over to their enemies, and they all fell by the sword." And he reinforces it. I dealt with them according to their uncleanness and their offenses, and I hid my face from them. So their past is explicitly linked to divine judgment because of their actions.
But the text doesn't just leave it there in that somber past. It pivots really strongly to a promise of future restoration.
Yes, that's the crucial turning point in this whole section. God declares, "Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will now bring Jacob back from captivity and will have compassion on all the people of Israel." This future act of restoration, it's presented as a divine initiative, God acting.
And just like the judgment on Gog was linked to God's name, the text connects this restoration back to that same core motivation, doesn't it?
Precisely. God says, "I will be zealous for my holy name." So both the dramatic judgment on the external enemy and the restoration of Israel are presented as flowing from God's commitment to his own name, his reputation.
How does the text describe Israel's state, their experience, after this promised restoration happens?
The text says, "They will forget their shame and all the unfaithfulness they showed toward me when they lived in safety in their land with no one to make them afraid." It pictures this time of security and putting away those past failures, forgetting the shame.
And the process involves bringing them back from being scattered everywhere.
Yes, God states, "When I have brought them back from the nations and have gathered them from the countries of their enemies."
And the ultimate purpose for this act, the gathering and restoration.
Again, it circles right back to divine revelation, but this time it's revelation through Israel. God says, "I will show myself holy through them in the sight of many nations." Israel's restoration itself becomes a way for the nations to see God's holiness.
It really seems like the entire sweep of this chapter, from Israel's past sin and exile, through this incredibly intense future judgment event, all the way to their final restoration, it's all framed within this larger story of God acting to make himself known. both to Israel and to the nations.
That's the consistent thread the text keeps emphasizing, yeah. It wraps up this whole part by hammering that knowledge theme again. Then they will know that I am the Lord their God, for though I sent them into exile among the nations, I will gather them to their own land, not leaving any behind.
Hmm.
And it affirms the completeness of this restored relationship. God declares, I will no longer hide my face from them, for I will pour out my spirit on the house of Israel, declares the sovereign Lord. So the judgment kind of clears the stage, you could say, for this full restored relationship where God's presence is totally evident.
This has been quite a deep dive into a remarkably detailed text. We've looked at the specific prophecy against Gog and his forces, explored the description of their absolute defeat on Israel's mountains,
Right.
uncovered that explicit divine purpose, rooted in God making his name known, and examined those incredibly granular details of the aftermath, years of fuel, months of meticulous burial, even that intense image of the sacrifice for the birds and animals.
Yeah, the key takeaways and knowledge nuggets from this chapter, as the text presents them, are pretty clear. It forecasts the specific future judgment on external enemies, driven entirely by God's sovereignty and his stated reasons, and it frames this whole event as absolutely integral to a larger narrative of Israel's history, dealing with past unfaithfulness, culminating in this future restoration where God's presence is fully manifest among them.
And as you listening, consider all this detail, especially that incredible level of focus the text puts on the cleanup. You know, the 7 years using weapons for fuel, the 7 months burying the dead, that whole process of setting up bone markers for later burial. What does that level of practical, almost gritty detail tell you about how the text intends for us to grasp the significance, or maybe the sheer reality and scale of this prophesied event? It really makes you stop and think about the consequences being described, doesn't it?
It really does. It moves it way beyond just abstract prophecy into something with immense physical weight within the world described by the text.
It certainly highlights the text's priorities in describing this future. Maybe here's something to leave you with, a thought to chew on from this deep dive. This text links a massive, chaotic judgment event against external forces, followed by this described years-long, painstaking cleanup process, links it directly to God making himself known and fully restoring Israel after their period of unfaithfulness in exile. What is that specific relationship, that connection between judgment, divine revelation, and restoration, as it's portrayed right here in Ezekiel chapter 39? What does that suggest about the overall perspective or message found within this particular text? Some to consider as you continue exploring these fascinating sources on your own.